Please be seated. Mr. Sargent, you can hear and see us.
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
I said you can hear and see us.
Yes, I can. Yes, good morning.
Mr. Sargent, you understand that you are still bound by the affirmation that you took yesterday?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Future.
Please, the Commission. Mr. Sargent, you might recall yesterday I asked you some questions around the process by which junkets were regulated, to the extent they were regulated, after 2010. And I just want to ask you some questions around what a regulator could do. You'll recall that as of earlier this year, there's been a direction given to the Perth Casino that prohibits it from conducting junkets. But one may foresee that in the future there might be when the borders are reopened, for example, there might be some reconsideration of that direction. And I'm interested in understanding your views as someone who has been involved in regulation of the Perth Casino for many years on a way in which some more appropriate or an appropriate method of regulation of junkets might look like in the future. So that's an introduction to the questions I'm going to ask you, Mr. Sargent. So if I understand the evidence you gave yesterday and perhaps in May relating to the change in regulation in 2010, it was in part driven by an understanding that other authorities were taking steps that mitigated the risks associated with criminal infiltration of junkets in Perth.
Yes.
And one of those steps was a satisfaction that the internal Crown Perth procedures for approval of junket operators and junket representatives were appropriate.
Yes.
One way in which the regulator in Western Australia, adopting even a risk-based approach, might approach regulation of junkets is to require the junket operator, the casino operator, to provide it with the same information that it uses to assess the applications for approval to operate junkets in Perth.
Yes.
And that would allow, or that would involve potentially providing the regulator with the same background information that the casino operator has, together with a statement that would outline the reasons for the casino operator approving the junket operator in circumstances where, for example, you might deem the operator a high risk. So that information could be provided to the regulator.
Yes, it could be provided, yes.
And the regulator would then have a transparent understanding of the process by which the casino operator had approved, at least in the case of high-risk junkets, the junket operator. Correct?
Yes, assuming that the regulator was to devise its own risk profiles.
Yes. So there would be in that instance, you'd have a check or balance to the casino operator's own internal processes for approval of junkets.
You'd have to have one in the regulator too.
Yes. And to your knowledge, that was not a procedure that the GWC or something like that, the GWC utilised in the period after 2010, is it?
No, it did not.
With the benefit of hindsight, would you agree with me that adopting a procedure like that in Western Australia would have been an appropriate way to regulate junket operators?
With the benefit of hindsight, yes.
And would you agree that if there is to be any return to international commission business in Western Australia, some form of more rigorous regulation would be required?
Yes, if it's desirable that that's the sort of activity that the Casino should get involved in.
And what I mean by international commission business is primarily overseas junket operators.
Yes.
All right, now, Mr. Sargent, could I ask you if you have your statement in front of you from your second statement, the most recent one, and to turn to paragraphs 64 to 67, and I think we ended yesterday dealing with your response to the question 26 and paragraph 64. If I could ask that you be shown some documents from the early part of 2017. The first one is CRW point 708.008.7829. I understand it's an NTP application. It should not be shown publicly. Have you got that letter in front of you, Mr. Sargent?
Yes, one's addressed to Mr. Connolly.
It's just Mr. Connolly. That's correct. The question I have for you is whether you were provided with a copy of that letter in the early part of 2017.
No.
Is this the first? Were you provided this letter earlier in your preparation for giving evidence?
Look, it may have been, but I can't recall it. I've been provided with a lot of material, and I just can't recall it. But I didn't receive it in that particular date, the 16th of March, around about then.
All right. Were you aware in the early part of 2017 that Crown Perth was proposing to make amendments to the casino manual in relation to junkets?
No.
Is that a matter that you would expect in the ordinary course for Mr. Connolly to have brought to your attention?
Only through the meeting process, if it was fairly straightforward, but if it required referral to the Commission, then it would come. So it would either come via a separate document and prepared by Mr. Connolly if it was a major enough, or it could have been handled under delegation. All
right. So in the instance where it's handled under delegation, in what way would that make its way to the GWC?
There would have been, once the decision had been taken, there was a standing agenda item requiring that all delegated decisions had to be referred up to the Commission for its information.
All right. So I have some other documents to show you, Mr. Sargent. Could I ask you be shown, this one is GWC .0019.0026. This is subject to a NTPO as well. And you, Mr. Sargent, if you need to refer to anyone's name in this document, you ask you not to, particularly if it's a person from the AUSTRAC organisation.
Can you blow it up a little bit bigger for me to read, please?
So it's the wrong document. It's coming up. No, it's not it. This is the letter. Should be a letter.
You mean this letter?
Yes, the attachment to the email. Sorry, Mr. Sergeant, we were technically challenged. There's an attachment to this email that I'm trying to have brought up. Here it is. Should be a letter dated 6 April 2017. Yeah, that's it. Again, Mr. Sergeant, was this a document that was brought to your attention in early 2017?
No. If the document is referred to me, and particularly on a file, I'll always initial it.
I see. And again, given the subject matter of that letter, is that a matter you would have expected Mr. Connolly to have brought to your attention?
Well, it depends in how far he was going. This is dealing with the AUSTRAC inquiries,
Yes.
but it would have been desirable to know, but probably not essential at that stage if it was only seeking information from us.
All right. The fact that a Commonwealth department or Commonwealth organisation was seeking information from the GWC as the regulator, do you not think that is a matter that the chairman of the GWC would, in the ordinary course, be made aware of?
At some stage, I would agree. The question is when. In that regard, that's
I see.
information. But there would have been at some stage if those things were interest being taken by AUSTRAC.
Okay. Can I ask that we call up GWC .0004, .0008, .0004. And in this case, operator, if you could allow Mr. Sergeant just to scroll to the next page when he has finished reading, or when he's ready to.
What date is that? What date is that?
The letter should be dated 11 April 2017, and it's at the bottom of the page.
Yeah. And it was addressed to Mr. Preston from Mr. Connolly,
Yes,
and I think he says, "Well, I have approved." Is that what it says? I've approved. I've determined to approve the amendments. Okay.
Correct.
Yes.
And
Sorry, just the going in, zooming in and out this early in the morning was making me feel ill.
fortunately for me, Madam Commissioner, I've got my own copy, so I'm not suffering the same. So when you're ready, Mr. Sergeant, we'll move.
Yes, you can go to the next page. Thank you.
Now, see, I think you responded to one of my earlier questions about the exercise of delegated power, and you can see here that Mr. Connolly appears to have approved the amendments to the casino manual in this case under the delegated power. But my question really is, again, was this a matter that was brought to your attention prior to the exercise of that power?
No, I would have, if it came to the Gaming Commission, it would have come via Mr. Connolly informing the Commission at the time of his exercise of delegation to change it, but it didn't come to me prior to.
So to get a sense of the way in which the departmental officers operated in so far as exercise of delegated power is concerned, as the Director General of the department, was there an expectation that you would be made aware of the exercise of delegated powers?
No, I had full confidence in Mr. Connolly, and the way in which would normally come through, particularly he made this determination that it had to be done under, it could be done under delegation, it would come to the Commission. I had no reason to doubt his judgment in that regard.
All right. So in the course, if it was within the ambit of his delegation, you would expect him to have exercised that power and then reported it at the appropriate time to the GWC. Is that?
But it should be reported the first time after he exercised that delegated power. That was the normal requirement.
All right. Now, could I ask you to be shown, this will probably be a subject of another non-publication, GWC.0004.0019.0008. The date of this letter, Mr. Sargent, is 18 April 2017, and you'll see from the outset it's the response. It's a response of the department in this instance to the inquiry of Austrac. And you can take your time to familiarise yourself, but the question really is whether or not you can recall receiving a copy of this around the time it was sent.
No.
So again, is this a matter where you would expect it to be something that, at the appropriate juncture, the information will be brought to your attention as Director General?
That, and if it had been brought to my attention, Director General, it would be a matter which would also be brought to the attention of the Gaming Commission members as well. So what date was that? What date was that again?
This letter is dated 18 April 2017.
And so I was answering within 14 days, roughly, within a couple of weeks it had been received. Yeah. Okay.
All right. So, can I ask now that you be shown, and this will no doubt also be a subject of non-publication, it's GWC.0004.0019.0012.
This one's fine.
Is it? You can see, Mr. Sargent, from the beginning of that document, it's an Austrac information report on effectively its conclusions as a result of, amongst other things, the inquiries made of your department in 2017. It's dated the 14th of July 2017. Is that a document that you can recall receiving in the course of 2017 or at some time approximate to its date?
No, I didn't. I'd ceased as being the Director General on the 30th of June, and then I didn't take up my position as an ordinary member of the Commission until the 1st of August, so I don't recall receiving that. Is that particular document only in relation to WA and Crown, or is that a general statement for casinos generally?
It's a general statement for casinos generally, and I would like to actually draw parts of it to your attention to see if you can recall whether you received it in your capacity as a member of the GWC.
Okay.
So if you make the assumption it deals with a review of the regulation of junkets Australia-wide in 2017 by Austrac, is the final report, or this report, something you would expect in the ordinary course to have been brought to the attention of the GWC members?
Yes.
And can you recall whether it was in fact brought to your attention either formally or informally by anyone from the department?
wasn't brought to my attention at all, and I can't remember it being brought as an agenda item on the Gaming Commission.
All right. Can I ask that the operator move to page _0004? And about a third of the way down the page, there's a summary of the activities undertaken in each of the states by each of the state regulators. And it indicates that of the each of the items involving some form of oversight, Western Australia only was involved in one of those, whereas other states were involved in many more.
Yeah.
Perhaps with the exception of the Northern Territory. So, again, as a member of the GWC, would you not expect this to be something of significant importance to know whether your regulatory framework is equivalent to other states of Australia?
Yes.
Now, you might recall yesterday one of the subjects of the compliance review in 2017 was the junket regulation in Western Australia.
Yes.
In the context of that review, would you regard this as a relatively significant piece of information for the Western Australian regulator?
As part of a review, yes.
And again, the fact it was not brought to your attention as a member of the GWC, is that of some concern to you today?
Yes.
And do you have, you may not be able to answer this, Mr. Sargent, but do you have any idea today why this was not brought to the GWC's attention?
No.
There was quite a bit of activity in 2017, Mr. Sargent. Can I ask you to return to your witness statement? And you might recall one of the questions dealt with awareness of the of you as the chairman of the GWC and as the Director General of the Department to various allegations that were made in the media at different times.
Yes.
One of those concerned the arrest of employees of one of Crown Resorts' subsidiaries in China. And you have indicated in paragraphs 56 to 58 of your statement some matters of your recollection of those events or those reports, and that you received a formal update from the representative of Crown in August 2017. And you've made reference there to a specific document.
I think it was, you're talking about the presentation that Crown made?
Yes, at the meeting in August 2017. Yeah. Just before I ask you some questions about that presentation, you have in paragraph 58, you've said that in terms of response, the GWC relied on the VCGLR, that's the Victorian Regulator's investigations. That's the first sentence of paragraph 58.
Well, in the context, you have to say, because we relied on because the Victorian regulator had done the investigation back when Melco was a privily closed associate, we were then happy to rely on the VCGLR doing the investigation into the Crown employees. I'm not saying there, unless I haven't expressed it well enough, that we were relying on their original investigation in relation to what was happening in China now.
All right, thank you for
The
that.
fact that they'd done that investigation for us back then, and they were doing it now, we said we'd rely. My position was we could rely on that exercise again for them to do that.
Right, thank you for that clarification, Mr. Sargent. When did you become aware that the VCGLR was undertaking an investigation into the China arrests?
I can't recall exactly, but it was around that time, because I think Mr. Conley had made the contact with the Victorian regulator. I didn't make the contact myself, but I can't tell you. I haven't got a recollection of the timing of that.
Was it, to the best of your knowledge, was it at the time that you were the Director General of the department, or after you had left?
I think it was when I was there. It would have been when I was there. Would have been. All
right. And what did you understand to be the nature of the investigation the VCGLR was going to undertake?
Well, my understanding of it was that it was to assess the validity of what Crown was saying in relation to their activities in China was legitimate, and that's the limit of my knowledge now about it.
All right. And was the fact of and your understanding of the nature of the VCGLR investigation reported or provided to the GWC members broadly?
Not in any formal context. I don't recall.
So when you say that there was a reliance on the VCGLR as investigations, was that effectively the position of the department, was it?
Well, it was a position that was taken to the commission, and Mr. Connolly and myself were prepared. We did put that position, and the commission was happy to rely on that position. So ultimately, it did become a commission position as well.
All right. Can I ask that?
And that's my recollection of it anyway.
All right. Can I ask you that we have a look at the minutes you've referred to in your sorry, you haven't referred to the minutes, you've referred to the agenda, but if I could take you to the minutes, which are GWC.0002, .0016, .0211, and the pinpoint is at page _002.
What date is that minute?
These are the minutes of a meeting on 22 August 2017.
Okay.
And if I could draw your attention to item 6.2 and just ask you to read that, and then if the operator, when you've finished reading to the bottom of that page, could take you to the top of the following page for the rest of the record of the meeting.
Okay, that's page 2, yes. Okay.
To the best of your recollection, is that an accurate record of or summary of the presentation given by Mr. Preston at that meeting?
I couldn't recall. All I know that he was reassuring the commission that they basically had no evidence to suggest that they were doing things wrong, but I can't recall the details. No.
All right. You'll see that
They were signed as a true record by the chairman, so I presume most members were happy with them.
So I have another question about this, which is it doesn't make any reference to the GWC's action or inaction in respect of the report. So it doesn't say, for example, it's noted we're concerned, we're waiting on the VCGLR to do its investigation. So if there had been discussion about that, would you expect it to have been minuted?
Not necessarily, because the main focus was a presentation by Mr. Preston.
All right. There are some aspects of the information conveyed that I'd like to ask you about and what your response was at the time, or your view at the time was, and whether there was discussion with other members of the GWC at the time about that. So the minute records that 19 employees were convicted of contraventions of Article 303, Clause 1 in Article 25 and another clause of the criminal law of the People's Republic of China. So representatives of the Crown Group were convicted of offences against the law of a foreign nation. Did you understand from the information provided to you that they were convicted in the course of carrying out their duties as employees of one of Crown Resort subsidiaries?
Yes, I think that was conveyed to us.
The offences related to the promotion of gambling in the Republic of China. That was your understanding, wasn't it?
Whether it was specifically that's reference to those sections, but that was about them promoting gambling in China.
All right. So would you accept that at the very least, Crown Resorts Limited, by association, was associated with illegal activities of its employees in the People's Republic of China?
Well, I think the position taken by Crown, whilst they pleaded guilty, they weren't necessarily saying that they had actually acted contrary to the law. I don't think Crown, in the presentation by Mr. Preston, had mentioned that, but that's only a broad recollection of mine.
Well, if someone's convicted of a crime, pleading guilty to it, is usually an indication of guilt, is it not?
Well, I would presume so, yes.
And the question really I have for you is, given those facts, just those bare facts, was there not a red flag in your mind about the suitability of Crown Resorts as the ultimate owner of the licensee of the Perth casino?
No, not to that extent. I don't think it was of anybody on the commission at that time either.
So there was no discussion resulting from the conviction of these people about whether or not it had any influence at all on the suitability of the licensee in Perth?
Suitability. Well, I think the position taken by the Commission and myself we were awaiting the outcome of the Victorian inquiry investigation into it rather than proceed. That's my best recollection.
All right. You have given some evidence in paragraphs 59 and 60 about some allegations that were made in the Federal Parliament by Mr. Andrew Wilkie MP.
Yes.
And could I ask that you be taken in this instance to the agenda for the GWC meeting on the in November. Sorry, what's this? This is also subject to non-publication order, and we can navigate straight to the GWC.0002.0016.0216_0055. This is not the same document you've referred to in your statement, Mr. Sargent, but it's an update on the allegations arising from Mr. Wilkie's statements to Parliament. And in paragraph 59, you have indicated that you understood the allegations to be primarily involve tampering with poker machines at the Melbourne Casino. Could I just draw your attention to the 4 bullet points under the heading background?
Can that be enlarged, please?
And you'll see there the first 2 bullet points might fall within the heading of tampering, but there are 2 other bullet points. One is a concern about avoiding AUSTRAC reporting obligations, and the other is encouraging people to continue gambling when they have a problem with gambling. This report or update deals with the tampering aspect. To your knowledge, was there any further report undertaken to update the members of the GWC on the other 2 aspects of the Wilkie allegations?
No, I can't recall that. The emphasis was on the gaming machines. That's my recollection.
When it was considered by the GWC in the latter part of 2017, was the allegation of an avoidance of AUSTRAC reporting obligations a matter of concern to you?
I can't recall it because I think the main priority was about the gaming machines at that stage, and so I can't recall it raising any concern with me at that stage.
Well, given that one of the lines of defence, as I understand it, that resulted in the change in the regulations to junkets in 2010 related to a reliance on, in part, on Crown's AML CTF program, was it not in your mind that an allegation of avoidance of those obligations had implications for the Perth casino regulation?
Obviously, it wasn't. In fact, it doesn't ring a bell in me having concerns about it.
So to the best of your recollection, is it the case there was no discussion at GWC meetings in which concerns were raised or voiced about the other 2 bullet points in that report relating to avoidance of AUSTRAC reporting obligations and harm minimisation?
I can't recall it being raised, no.
All right. Now, can I ask you, I've got some more questions to clarify some of the things in your statement, Mr. Sargent. If I could ask you to turn to, there are 2 parts of your statement that deal with the compliance review in 2017. You've dealt with it briefly in paragraph 68 and 69. And and again at paragraphs 88, 89, 90 and 91. And I think you've noted that in the course of 2017, there were compliance reviews and reports brought to the GWC in a number of areas, and they are dealt with in paragraph 89 of your statement. And you've noted earlier in the statement in paragraphs 68 and 69 that the review of the junkets was not undertaken in 2017 and was dropped, or appears to have been dropped. Given that the review was undertaken at your direction in the early part of 2017, did it occur to you to request at any time that the compliance review be completed?
No, it didn't, largely because I was very conscious of the impact that the machinery government changes were having on the resources within the department. So it wasn't something that I was particularly pushing as a high priority at that stage.
There were a number of factors in 2017 I'm going to put to you, or at the time in 2007, I'm going to put to you, Mr. Sargent, and I'll ask you a question. There had been allegations in 2014 of infiltration of junket operations by organised crime. There were allegations in the latter part of 2017 by Mr. Wilkie dealing with avoidance of AUSTRAC reporting obligations. And the compliance review dealt with everything except for junket operations in Western Australia. You have accepted that they are matters that should have been dealt with in the review if it had been comprehensive. Given those aspects of public information at the time, did it not occur to you at all that it was a necessary, effectively, responsibility of the GWC to complete the review into junket regulation?
As I said, I wasn't pushing any particular matters, and I was very conscious of the pressure that Mr. Connolly were under in relation to the machinery government changes.
So is the sorry, Mr. Sargent, is the answer to that you did in fact, it entered your mind, but you put it to one side because you knew of the restraints on the department from a resources perspective?
I think that is a fair comment. I didn't push it from that point of view.
So you didn't push it because you didn't think it could be done?
Well, I can't recall the reasoning, but as I said, I was very conscious of the pressure that the agency was under in respect to the machinery government. They had a lot of pressures in relation to getting their budgets in order, and staffing situations were not easy. And Mr. Connolly in particular, who would have to supervise the particular review, was involved in other activities which were not there when we started this particular process to review the various aspects of the casino operations.
Did you share your views with the other members of the GWC?
I can't recall whether they were all very conscious of the cost. Sorry, very conscious of the machinery government impacts on the department, and I think that the members of the commission were very concerned about the health and welfare of this department people, in particular at times Mr. Connolly.
I mean, in particular, Mr. Sargent, did you share your views about, we haven't done the junket compliance review? Should we do it? Does the department? I don't think the department has the resources to carry.
I can't recall. If it was just a general discussion at all.
to the best of your recollection, did any other member of the GWC raise with you, we were meant to do a junket review, it hasn't happened, where is it?
No. And those members had been members of the commission from the time that this was first raised as well. Yeah.
All right. Mr. Connolly, I take it you are aware, or you were aware in the period during which you were a member of the GWC, that the casino licensee is obliged to provide certain bank account information to the GWC.
Can you be a bit more specific? What time are you looking at? What bank information was required?
In accordance with the casino manual.
Was it in relation to the burglary inquiry? I can't get a handle on where you're going.
In a general sense, there was an obligation on the part of the casino licensee to provide information about bank reconciliations and matters of that nature to the GWC.
Well, not directly to the GWC, it would have been to the inspectors, wouldn't it? Right?
Well, to ask that we I take you to CRW .709.003.1285. Which is a pinpoint to the directions. Now, these are the directions, Mr. Sergeant, as of 23 February this year. But the one I want to draw to your attention is 4.1, which doesn't appear to have changed for some time.
Could we scroll down, please, so we can see the whole of 4.1?
That direction would have been in there for some time.
Yes, I'm particularly interested here in 4.1C, which starts at the bottom of that page and goes over to the next page.
Yeah.
So the question was really whether you're aware at the time that you were in your tenure as a member or as the chairman of the GWC, you were aware of this direction requiring certain information to be given to the Commission.
Well, whilst it was required to be given to the Commission, it basically went to the inspectorate. This was part of the revenue reconciliation to ensure that the casino was complying with its requirement to pay tax at the correct rate on the gross gaming revenue. It never came to the Commission, although the words Commission, there was officers in the department that received those.
All right. Now, were you aware that as of August 2019, Crown Perth had not been providing all the required information in respect of, specifically, Riverbank Investments accounts?
That the first time we became aware of the Riverbank Investments account was at the presentation to the Commission, I think by Mr. Preston.
All right. Can I ask the operator corp CRW.513.024.6387? This is a letter from Mr. Preston to Ms. Perry of 23 August 2019.
Yes.
My question is whether you have seen this letter before or if it's been provided to you as a member of the GWC.
I can't recall receiving it as a member of the GWC. I can't recall that.
As a member of the GWC, can you recall being informed that sometime in 2019 that Crown had discovered an oversight and had then provided information in relation to that?
No, I can't recall that.
All right. Now,
Was that in relation to the Riverbank Investments accounts? Is that what they were saying?
yes, it is.
I can't recall anything in that regard. And I understand those accounts were closed in December of 2019.
Yes,
I don't think that was brought to the attention of the Commission either.
all right. So can I ask that you navigate, sorry, operator, we could go, you mentioned, Mr. Sargent, a little earlier, a presentation. Can I ask that we move to GWC point 001, sorry, 0001, 0009, 0001, and I think this is a non-publication order on this one. And operator, first of all, Mr. Sargent, did Mr. I think it was Murray and perhaps Mr. Preston, did they give a PowerPoint presentation at the meeting that you can recall?
I recall that. Who was the other officer there?
I'm just trying to remember. I think it was Mr. Murray. It was at least one of.
I can't recall the other officer. I remember Mr. Preston there. I just can't recall.
So at least Mr. Preston was there.
Yes, definitely, because he gave the presentation.
All right. Now, can I ask that we scroll to page 7 of that document? And direct your attention to the bullet point at the foot of the page where it was represented that certain accounts were opened and operated as dedicated casino wagering accounts. And then if I could ask you to scroll to page 32, and there's a representation there as to which accounts were operated for casino wagering, and you'll see there's a reference to accounts in the name of Burswood nominees and accounts in the name of Riverbank Investments in Australian and foreign exchange accounts. And I think you said earlier, I may be wrong, if I am, you can correct me, Mr. Sargent, that this was the first time you'd heard of the Riverbank Investments accounts.
It was the first time, but at that stage, it didn't raise bells that it would not have been a process whereby the inspectors were aware of it. So it was the first time I'd ever seen Riverbank Investments Private Limited.
So there had been some media allegations around this time referring to Riverbank Investments, had there not?
Sorry, there
were some media reports around the same time as this presentation.
I can't recall the media inquiries. That came more in 2020 after this. I can't recall the Riverbank's Investments media concerns.
All right. So to the best of your recollection, is the first time you had heard the name Riverbank Investments was at
Yes.
the meeting in August 2019?
That's the first time.
And were any questions asked of the representatives of Crown who were present why Burswood nominees and Crown Perth were operating an account in the name Riverbank Investments?
No, because there was always authority to open bank accounts, and I can recall some time ago they were given approval to run some of their programs in currencies, certain currencies other than Australian dollars. That meant the patients didn't have to convert their dollars convert their currency into Australian dollars. So it didn't ring a bell to me as being of a major issue at that stage.
I'm not focusing, Mr. Sargent, so much on the opening and operation of bank accounts for use in casino operations and gaming.
Yeah.
It's the name of the account that I'm drawing your attention to. Did it occur to you that the use of the name Riverbank Investments in connection with the Burswood casino was an unusual name?
No, it didn't at that stage. And bear in mind, the presentation was a fairly broad one, but no, it didn't raise concern at that stage. But when I started to read how it was being used, well, that raised concern was well after this event.
No, I understand that, but one doesn't normally go to a casino to invest.
Well, it's a name. It didn't raise major issues with me. The name of a bank account, that name.
No questions were asked to the representatives from Crown. Why have you got an account in the name Riverbank Investments?
Yeah. I didn't ask any. I can't recall if anybody else did.
You were aware at the time that allegations had been made in the media about money laundering through the account? That was the point of this presentation, wasn't it?
No, not about that account. The presentation was following the Four Corners episode, not Four Corners, for Channel 9 in July, and I don't recall that identifying Riverbank Investments Pty Limited as being a major issue. I don't recall that. But there was the Channel 9 article, that thing that they were responding to, per se. And then, as you can see what they were saying, the transactions through those accounts are subject to AML CTF reporting obligations. So there was no need for, I think, members of the Commission to raise concerns. We're being reassured that all those accounts complied with the AUSTRAC requirements in respect to AML and CTF.
By this stage,
By
this stage, Mr. Sargent, were the reassurances that you had been receiving from representatives of Crown starting to wear thin?
Well, at this one, following the Channel 9 one, I took quite a bit of comfort out of the advertisement that the Board of Directors had put in the paper to reassure not only the citizens but everybody, and the reassurances were given. That I wouldn't say it was wearing thin at that stage with me.
All right. In all events, I think the evidence you've given in your statement is that the decision of the GWC taken at this time was to await the outcome of the Bergen inquiry.
It was the outcome of the inquiry, yeah. Yes, I think that was the case.
All right. Can I ask you there's one aspect of paragraph 62 of your statement that I'd like you to clarify it for me if you could.
Sorry, what was that again? Which paragraph?
62. You have a statement that says, however, it should be noted. Now, as I understand, you're saying there that some aspects of the report had limited ongoing relevance given that the Chinese junkets to Australia had effectively ceased. What do you? I've got two questions in relation to this, Mr. Sargent. First is what do you mean by saying that the relevance had been diminished?
Sorry, what was that again? What do I mean by
Well, you've said here some aspects of the report had limited ongoing relevance. What aspects had limited ongoing relevance, given your view that the junkets had ceased from China?
Well, that fact that to me was the major source of concerns, and the fact they had ceased bringing people in from China meant that the issues involved there had been addressed in the sense that there was no longer Chinese patrons being brought into the casino.
But junket operators are not only confined to mainland China, are they?
No, but that's the vast majority of where they were coming from was from China.
So to the extent that junket operations had ceased to emanate from China, that statement may be accurate. What of other sources of junket operations? In other words, the concerns about criminal infiltration in other parts of the world would not have been addressed, would they?
Well, I can't recall where they would come from specifically, but I know part of the market would have been Indonesia. Singapore, I think, was very, very hard to compete with, and to some extent Malaysia.
And what do you include in the description of Chinese junkets? What parts of the world? Is it strictly the PRC? Does it include Macau and Hong Kong?
It'd be the PRC from my perspective, but I'm not sure how many were coming down from Macau in that regard, because most of Macau's patrons were coming from China mainland or from Hong Kong. So I don't think Macau itself had junkets coming in from there. And
what do you mean by effectively ceased? That leaves open the possibility that not completely ceased. So what do you mean by effectively ceased?
Well, I think that would have meant some were still coming in from Hong Kong. That's all I can say there. But that they weren't bringing any from mainland China.
And what was the source of your understanding of that, of where the junket operators were coming from?
Just general knowledge, that was all. I wouldn't say it was specific knowledge, bearing in mind that in preparing these documents, there was a fair degree of pressure on myself and the assistants I had to prepare them.
Are you referring here to your statement, are you?
Your statement, yes, that there was just referring to the fact that one was trying to draw from one's own knowledge without having the ability to specifically refer to things. But that was just a general comment that I made.
When you say general knowledge, do you mean knowledge you acquired in the course of your membership of the GWC or as a Director General of the department?
I'd suggest more as the time as Director General than I would have done in relation to where their clients came from. When I first started, the main clientele was coming in from Singapore and Indonesia in particular. And over time that changed, and when the Macau developed, there was a strong emphasis on the Chinese market as distinct from the other markets. But I couldn't tell you exactly where they are. That was just a general comment.
As of 2019, you were an ordinary member of the GWC. What was the source of yours?
Correct.
Okay, so what was the source of your information at that time that junkets had effectively ceased from China?
Well, I knew that they had ceased because I think the Crown had announced it some time ago in 2016. And I can recall it was a major concern in relation to they just opened the hotel that part of the year.
All right, would that be a convenient time?
Certainly. Mr. Sargent, we will take morning tea now for 15 minutes. If you, yes, well, you're free to go about your business for the next 15 minutes. If you could be back in time to recommence at 20 minutes past 1. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Will do.
And we will adjourn till 1:20 p.m.
All right.
sit. Yes, Mr. Futrell.
May it please the Commission. Mr. Sargent, during the time that you were the Director General of the department, did you have an executive assistant?
And not all the time, the latter years, but most of the time I did, yes.
And at one point was that Ms. Caroline Charles.
Yes, yes.
And at the time you had an executive assistant, was that person's one of their responsibilities to manage your diary?
Probably jointly.
With you?
Yes, with me and her, yes.
And did the executive assistant's duties also include to make arrangements and manage your travel arrangements?
Yes, make arrangements for me, yes.
And did you?
And I booked some things myself as well.
All right. So did you keep an electronic diary?
My diary was tied to my phone, was tied into the computer system at work, yes.
All right. And when you used the function on the phone did you utilise the meeting maker function so you could send an invite to someone for a calendar invitation?
I can't remember me inviting people. I used to put more inclined of putting things in which I had to attend to, and it was synced into the computer.
All right. I see. So if you had an appointment with someone where you made it, you'd enter it in the system yourself?
Yes, yes.
Now, during the time that you were the Director General of the department and the Chairman of GWC, you met fairly regularly with the CEO of Crown Perth, didn't you?
And in the latter years, probably Mr. Preston, yes.
Right, so you met with Mr. Preston at times and Mr. Barry Felsteed at times.
Yes, yes.
And it was your usual practice to meet at Crown Perth?
Yes, it was.
And what was the purpose of the meetings? Would start with Mr. Felsteed. What was the main reason for meeting with him?
Well, I can't particularly recall the latter years, but very much so when there was developments to be processed, because they didn't require ministerial approval, and Mr. Preston the same. You had to get a number of approvals made under the Casino Booth Island Agreement Act. The agreement scheduled for that particular act. There was a number of approvals required for developments at the Crown. There was quite a few times I'd be out there, and I'd have bundles of documents as well, usually. I
see. So it was the purpose of the meetings was to attend to the affairs of the department primarily. Is that right?
Yeah. So I didn't meet very often at all as chair of the Game Wagering Commission. Very rarely.
And over the course of the time of your dealings with Mr. Felsteed, did you develop a friendship with him?
No.
How would you describe the nature of your relationship with Mr. Felsteed?
Professional relationship. He was the CEO. He was, at one stage, he would have been the director of operations, and then one level below, and then he was appointed as the CEO but I had no friendship with Mr. Felsteed. All
right. And what about if I asked you the same questions with respect to Mr. Preston?
Same. I had no friendship with either of them.
I think yesterday you mentioned at one point that you had a high degree of trust in Crown Perth.
Yes.
And do I understand from that one of the people in whom you had that trust was Mr. Felsteed?
Yes.
And would that comment equally apply to Mr. Preston?
Yes, for slightly different reasons, but yes.
Okay, and with Mr. Preston, why were the reasons different?
He was admitted to practice law.
And so is that one of the reasons you had confidence in him? He was a qualified lawyer.
Yes, that added it, but I had full confidence in both gentlemen.
All right. Now, in your first statement, Mr. Sergeant, you have made reference to a couple of travel trips you did for one to Melbourne and one to Macau.
Yes.
Starting with the one to Melbourne, you've made reference to it in paragraphs 48 to 54 of your first statement, and in your second statement in paragraph 115. I just want to understand a bit more about the chronology of that, the Melbourne trip, Mr. Felsteed. Sorry, Mr. Sergeant. Could I ask that we call up CRW.708.003.5229? Okay. Mr. Sergeant, this is quite a long letter. The subject matter of it is dealt with underneath the dear Mr. Sergeant. It's to do with ticket in, ticket out. Do you recall receiving this letter in May 2012?
No, I don't. Has it been initialed by me?
I don't know that this copy has. I think the copy may have originated from Crown, given the number CRW. So it may have been disclosed by Crown rather than the department.
Yeah, I can't recall specifically claiming its attention of. Is it attention somebody? I can't read it, who it is. Yeah, Lee Radder. So sometimes those matters were directed straight to the officers concerned. But May 2012, yeah.
All right. Were you aware? You were aware that there was a proposal to start a ticket in, ticket out facility at Crown Perth?
I was aware of it, yes.
Could I ask you to be shown now DLG.8002.0001.1727. This consistent with your recollection of the way in which your electronic diary system operated at the time?
It looks as though the executive assistant would have set this up because it's quite more formal than what I would have done.
So has an organiser, executive assistant, required attendees, Barry Sargent and Barry Felsteed, for example?
Yeah.
Do you recall receiving these sort of messages where you click accept and it goes immediately into your electronic diary?
I can recall receiving it, whether this one specifically, I can't recall, but I would do if that was the case.
Was it your usual practice?
I can't recall whether I did it or whether my executive assistant did. I can't recall, but I wasn't that good at doing things in this regard.
All right. Do you recall whether you had a meeting with Mr. Felsteed in around May 2012?
I can't recall that at all. I'm sorry. If the diary's there, and if I was to go, I would have gone to meet with him.
All right. Now, could I ask you to be shown DLG.0008.0010.0001? Do you recall receiving that letter from Mr.
No,
Phillips?
I can't recall that in detail, but it's addressed to me. And is it one of our documents, is it? Is that one of our documents?
It is. It's got received Department of Racing, Gaming and Liquor.
Well, it hasn't been initialed by me at that stage, so it may not have come to me. Normally I used to put a line through them, initial them and refer them on to somebody.
Right. But you recall being invited to visit Crown Melbourne to make observations about the ticket in, ticket out procedure?
Yes, I can recall that being part of it, and yes.
All right. Now, can I ask if you could be shown the minutes of the meeting of the GWC on 31 July 2012, which is DLG.8001.0036.5460. And move to page 3 of it and item 5.4. Now, I appreciate some time ago, Mr. Sargent, but do you recall there being a meeting at which a demonstration was given of the ticket in, ticket out system to members of the GWC?
I don't recall specifically, but that would have been quite normal for that to have been done to provide a demonstration to the commission members.
All right. Now, under the resolution, there's a resolution to approve in principle the implementation of that system, and subject to an inspection in Melbourne. So is that was the purpose for your journey to Melbourne?
What date was this meeting?
This is 31 July 2012.
Oh, 12, is it?
Yeah.
I can't recall if I'd made a commitment to go to Crown at that stage. I don't know who was seeing the inspection, but I didn't go to Crown until 2014, I think it was.
All right.
So I don't know whether another officer was going to look at it. I can't remember. I did that. The trip that I referred to going to Melbourne was in 2014. And I can't recall what month it was. I think it was the first quarter of 2014, which I reported. It said in my earlier statement.
All right. Well, I'll ask you to look at a document that might assist you with your memory here, Mr. Sargent. DLG.008.0011.0001. Now, I appreciate this was, no, that's not the right document. Yes, it is. Sorry, it is. This is not your document, Mr. Sargent, but if I could ask you to consider the following page, which is part of the returns for September 2012.
What date was that?
The date is in the top right-hand corner, 30th 2012.
And that would have been paid for by the government, that one. And therefore, I would have gone to, that's what it says.
Well, the second line item, if I could draw your attention to, there's two line items under your name.
Yeah.
One is describing a trip in July 2012 to Darwin,
That's with the minister, yes.
and it refers to source of funding, CF.
Yeah.
Do you know what that's a reference to?
That's consolidated fund.
All right. And the airfares are paid for out of the consolidated funds. The next line item is another reference to you. In August 2012,
Yeah.
it makes a reference to visiting Crown Casino to view new gaming machine technology and improvements to the gaming floor at hotel. It says paid.
Was it? Okay. I'll accept that as a valid one, but I don't recall that one as such.
All right. Source of funding, CF.
Yeah.
First paid, CF, then cost reimbursed.
Okay. Yeah. I accept that's what's there. Yeah.
Are you suggesting there may have been another trip to Melbourne, or was there one?
I think there was one in 2014. This one I can't recall.
All right.
I can't recall it at all.
The question I have for you is relates to, in paragraph 113, whether the trip is in 2012 or 2014 doesn't matter to the question I'm about to ask you, Mr. Sargent. So you said in the last part of the paragraph, of your second statement, paragraph 113, it makes a reference to if you believe that Crown paid for your meals. If they didn't pay, I would have directed the department to invoice them for my meals. So in other words, your view was it was appropriate for Crown to bear the costs of your trip to Melbourne and the costs of your accommodation and meals.
Through an invoicing them.
Sorry, just wait for a moment, please, Mr. Sargent. This is a reference to the Macau trip.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's a wrong paragraph, 115. My apologies, 115.
That was because it was I was going there for their benefit. And I was invoicing them for them. If we went to a restaurant and we couldn't split the bill, then rather than me pay for the whole bill, I was happy to let the Crown to pay for it. Otherwise, I would have paid it and invoiced them for it. But that relates to the trip to Melbourne in 2014, I think. So the other one is I didn't recall that, and I had not put it into my witness statements at all. The 1 in 12, which I said is reimbursed. To me, that's the first knowledge that I've got. I didn't complete that particular form, so whether it was reimbursed, I don't know, or whether that is the one that you referred to and that return that Mr. Connolly signed.
All right, Mr. Sargent, I'm going to ask you to slow down again.
Sorry.
The question really is more directed to who pays. So you've expressed the view that if you're travelling for, I think you used the words, the benefit of Crown, they ought to pay. My question is, as the regulator of Crown Perth, if there is a legitimate reason to inform yourself about an activity for the purposes of regulation, would it not be appropriate for the funding to be taken from the department itself or the GWC?
In considering that now, I think that's an appropriate conclusion. But back then, my thinking was that we had charged them for other things at times, and we could charge them for some investigations, as long as it was the travel was organised through my department, etc. I had no qualms about charging Crown for those things. I didn't think it impacted at all on my or the department's independence. Bearing in mind, ultimately, these decisions were made by the Commission, if they were to be approved or not. But I have got a different view now, and you can I haven't undertaken that. Well, I didn't ever undertake any travel like that again, but I understand where you're coming from on that.
All right. Mr. Sargent, could I ask you to be shown another document? Again, I know we are delving into some years ago. This document is DLG.008.0010.0021.
Can I just ask my friend to confine this document to the personal screen? There's apparently some personal information of employees potentially. It may not necessarily be on this page, Commissioners.
All right. Perhaps we can confine the screen to the witness and the interested parties and the Commission. First, Mr. Sargent, do you recall receiving a letter from Mr. Felstein in April 2013 requesting that you or accompany him on a journey to Macau to look at the casinos in Macau?
Yes.
And if you can, this document actually goes on to include in the following pages a memorandum to the Minister seeking effectively approval for the trip and with some estimated costs associated with it, including that the funding ultimately will be borne by Crown. And I believe this might be a reference in your first statement in paragraphs 30. You have indicated that I think you made the trip and that you understood it was in your capacity as Director General of the department rather than as the Chairman of GWC.
Correct.
In what way was knowledge of Crown Perth's competition in Asia of assistance to your function as the Director General of the department?
Well, one of the issues that Crown was addressing was its competition with not only Macau but Singapore, and I had been to Singapore in a different capacity, and their view was that it would be beneficial if I had some first-hand experience to the facilities that they were competing with at that stage. And when they put that proposal to me, I made it quite clear that I didn't have the money in the budget and I wasn't prepared to allocate money from the budget for it.
Sorry, Mr. Sargent, I'm trying to understand what relevance the competition to Crown Perth had to the functions of the department at the time.
Well, Crown, if I can recall correctly, under the state agreement has a responsibility to maintain the site to an international standard. They were, I don't know, at that stage, I think they committed to the hotel to build it, but I took the view, and when I discussed it with the Minister, that I didn't know what the standard of facility was like in Macau, and we agreed there could be some advantage in me having that first-hand knowledge of it. That's what I do work for the Minister in many areas, and this was one that wasn't necessarily as a chairman of the Game Wagering Commission, but more as a support for the Minister.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Sargent, for that answer. Could I ask that we call up CRW.008.002.8755? This is subject to a non-publication order. And Mr. Sargent, this is Mr. Felstein's itinerary for the trip to Macau in July 2013.
Yes.
And if you could scroll down the page, please, to the end of, a bit further, the bottom half of the page, thank you. You've mentioned in your statement that on the evening of the 22nd of July, you had dinner at the Jade Dragon, I think you said that, and that you also attended a theatre show.
Yes.
The House of Dancing Water theatre show. You see that both those items are recorded in Mr. Felstein's itinerary.
Yes.
And then over the page, on the following day, there's a dinner recorded at a restaurant by the name of Ying. Do you recall that the name of the restaurant you attended on the...
I can't recall the names of the restaurants at all. They were at the two respective casinos that were operated by the Crown Melco joint venture. They were the two casinos that operated there.
All right, but at each of the dinners, Mr. Felstein and Mr. Preston were present.
Yes, yes, along with a number of their local executives.
Okay. All right, now, Mr. Sergeant, could we show you, please, DLG.0008.0010.0028? And again, can you scroll? Is it to the bottom of the page, the 22nd July?
Mm.
And you'll see there, Mr. Sergeant, this is your itinerary, and it's showing for the 22nd of July just a reference to dinner and from 8 p.m. free time. And if we could turn over the page to the 23rd of July, corresponding entry for dinner is, again, it just notes it's dinner, it doesn't identify a location. Do you recall receiving your itinerary in around July 2013?
I don't recall whether my executive assistant received them, but I don't recall. It would have come and I would have just taken it with me. All
right. Could I ask you to be shown CRW.008.001.4702? And could I direct your attention to the middle of the page? It's an email chain. There's an email from Executive Assistant Caroline Charles to someone else about itinerary Macau, and it's requesting some changes to your itinerary. For the 22nd of July.
I can't recall that at all. I can't recall that discussion with Caroline.
It's Mr. Sergeant, is the case that you gave an instruction to your executive assistant to make changes to your itinerary, isn't it?
I don't recall making that instruction because it's contrary to my understanding of what happened.
Well, in all events, your itinerary and Mr. Felstein's itinerary, you agree, ultimately were not the same?
They weren't, because he left also before I didn't travel with Mr. Felstein, if I remember correctly.
So is it your evidence to the Commission that you don't recall giving your executive assistant an instruction to make alterations to your itinerary to remove the references to the venues for dinner and the attendance at the theatre show?
I don't, because it's contrary to the evidence I've put here. I don't recall that at all. I can't recall the nature of the dealings with Caroline and that.
All right. So is it your evidence? Is it that it wasn't you did not receive notice before the dinner held on the 22nd of July of the proposal that you attend the theatre show?
That's the extent of which I can recall here. Whether it came into Caroline, but I can't recall any discussion at all with Caroline on that one.
Well, can you think of any reason that your executive assistant would be asking for changes to be made to your itinerary if you had not given instruction to her?
Well, I don't know the nature in which we would have talked about it, but there would have been some discussion, but I can't recall the nature of it at all.
All right. Now, you've mentioned in paragraph 114 that you felt some discomfort at attending the stage show.
Yes, that's what I've said. That's why I said that what's there is contrary to what I've done, and I'm, with the best of my knowledge, that is what transpired. All
right. Well, what was your discomfort that you felt about attending that theatre show?
Well, because I understood it was City of Dreams as a compliment, and that therefore, in the circumstances, I should make a contribution or pay for the ticket. That was the discomfort at that stage.
Is that because it could be seen to have been a gift to you as a Director General of the department?
I think in that case, I would accept the meals, but that would have been the discomfort there. Yeah.
But you didn't pay for the ticket to the theatre, did you?
No, I didn't, because I thought they were complimentary, and I know what the casinos often do provide complimentary tickets for things. So of one of the resort staff, I left some money. I can't recall exactly, but I think it was around about 1,000 Hong Kong dollars, which would have been somewhere less than $200 to make a donation to a local charity. So I felt comfortable with that.
What made you believe it was complimentary, as in provided to you by the casino in Macau? When I was sitting at the leg, as I said, there were a number of executives at the table. I would have thought that Crown wouldn't have been paying for it. I would have even thought someone of Mr. Felstein's standing, that they'd be providing complimentary tickets to them. But that's my current understanding. I can't elaborate more than that from what I've said on that statement. I'm very comfortable with that statement, 114. Mr. Sergeant, complimentary is another way of saying gift, isn't it?
Well, that's why I've included it in that section, because I think is that the heading section, gifts and other matters?
Yes. Did you make declarations of the value of the dinners you received in Macau and the theatre tickets to the appropriate people in the department?
No, I didn't, because for one thing, I didn't see the food as a gift. I saw that as being part of the cost of going, and if I had paid for it, I would have charged Crown for those meals. given the nature of the restaurants, it wasn't possible to ask for a 1/10 or 1/12 or 1/5 of the bill. But I saw it as part of the going there for the travel. Otherwise, I would have had to have probably eaten on my own, which would have been the alternative if I hadn't attended. So I had no qualms or feelings about the fact that this was part of a business trip. I wasn't getting any personal benefit out of it. So therefore, it would be appropriate for me to be supplied with meals. So I wouldn't have declared it along those lines.
The same can't be said for the theatre show, though, can it?
No, well, in fairness, I thought that I was making a contribution to cover the cost of it, so I was comfortable with that as well.
All right. Can I ask, we call up DLG.0012.0002.0028. This is a four-page document, Mr. Sergeant, that is the corporate governance policy of the department.
Yes.
And if I could take you to the last page, which is page 0031. It's signed by you.
Yes.
And so in 2013, Mr. Sergeant, you were well aware of the departmental policy concerning gifts and hospitality?
Yes.
Now, under the heading on page 0029, there's a reference to inducements. There's a paragraph that begins, you must exercise judgment in determining whether the acceptance of any gift or hospitality could reasonably be interpreted by others as an inducement which might place you or the department under an obligation to the donor. Would you agree with me that accepting, at least in this instance, the tickets to the theatre show may fall within the description in that paragraph?
No, because I believe that I paid for the ticket, and the other aspect of the trip was to experience first-hand knowledge of what offerings were available within Macau. I didn't see that as an inducement at all. It was a business trip. I left to go there and to come back. I wasn't going anywhere other than to view and experience the facilities which were available in Macau. Had I been given some tickets to go to a show at Burswood Theatre and those sort of things, definitely an inducement. But in the circumstance of the one to in Macau, no, I didn't see it as an inducement.
All right. Can I ask if you be shown again, this time page 0030, which is a heading, gifts that cannot be accepted. And could I draw your attention to the second bullet point, major bullet point?
I see that, yes.
Now, it was the case and remains the case that Crown Perth is regularly seeking approvals from the department in connection with the operation of the casino in Perth.
Yes.
Would you not agree with me with the proposition that accepting any gift of hospitality from Crown Perth by the Director General of the Department or any other departmental officer should not, in those circumstances, be done.
When you say those circumstances, you mean the circumstances of going to Macau?
Accepting any gift or hospitality from Crown Perth, wherever in the world it's given, is inconsistent with the departmental policy.
No, I don't agree. I didn't see that as a gift of hospitality in that instance. It was a business trip that I was undertaking. I repeat, if it had been something to do with going to Crown when I lived in Perth, they're fine. But I didn't see it as a gift of hospitality. I did not see it as a gift of hospitality. It was part of the trip costs.
The restaurants you attended were not an average sort of restaurant, where they were high-end, expensive restaurants.
But to me, firstly, there were a large number of their own executives there, so it was a working dinner, and I had an opportunity to touch base with them.
Sorry, Mr. Sargent, can I interrupt you? You're answering a question which actually wasn't asked of you. So Mr. Futrell simply asked you whether they were high-end restaurants.
Well, I don't know. They were Chinese restaurants. I'm not a fan of Chinese food, so I don't know. Can I answer it this way, Commissioner? There was some reference in the media about one of them being a Michelin standard restaurant. Well, that's the first I knew about it at that standard. So I'm not a fan of Chinese food. So I just went where the invitation was to join in with other inspectors. So thank you for that.
Mr. Sargent, you didn't stay in the same hotel as the executives of Crown, did you?
No.
You stayed in a less expensive hotel.
Well, it was less expensive, but it was also very close. I was very close, yes.
And you didn't consider it appropriate at that time to be staying in the same hotel as the executives. That's why you chose an alternative location, isn't it?
Yes, yes.
So having dinner at restaurants and attending theatre shows, on any view, could be described as hospitality.
Well, you can take that view, but I'm giving you my view on it. It was not a gift of hospitality.
So in your mind, it wasn't hospitality, and therefore it was acceptable.
It was a working dinner. It was a trip that was undertaken as part of my duties. It wasn't a personal trip. It was a business trip, as far as I was concerned. And in the circumstances, I thought it was appropriate to join them, and I had no idea of the standard of the restaurant.
All right. Now, after you returned to Perth from your trip to Macau, do you recall having a series of meetings very regularly with either Mr. Felsteed or Mr. Preston? Well,
I think I would have recalled them, because at that stage there was quite a bit of work being done for the foundations for the hotel, and there were matters which had to be approved by the minister, and quite often they involved plans, and I needed some explanations of what was going on. There was that sort of follow-up, but yes, there would have been a number of meetings out at Crown on those.
And in the course of those meetings in that period, was the subject of the International Commission business tax rate raised?
No.
When did you first become aware of Crown Perth's desire to bring about a reduction in the tax rate?
Probably 2011.
2011. So it had been on the cards for some time.
It had been on the cards for a long time, yes.
And was one of the reasons that Mr. Felsteed invited you to Macau to demonstrate to you the competition connected to Crown's desire to reduce the tax rate?
Well, that was never the link that he was making in any conversations with me.
You know that Crown had a number of meetings with your minister to do with reduction of the tax rate?
Yes.
And you ultimately made a submission in favour of the reduction in that rate, didn't you?
I can't recall making a submission. Have you got a copy of it?
can I call up DLG .0002, .0003, .000005? There are the briefing. You can take your time to read this, Mr. Sergeant.
Yeah. You can make it a bit larger for me, please.
The note is 4 pages. You can take as long as you like to read it, Mr. Sergeant.
Well, I do recall that the most important part of that, just the beginning there, was the briefing note, Treasury's briefing note for the Treasurer, and he said you have sought comment on the Crown's proposal. Comment. Okay, can you keep going for me? Yeah, a bit more, please. That's enough. Oh, can you go back up? There's a paragraph I've missed. Just one. That's it. Thank you. Yes, next page. Well, there's a bit more on the bottom of this one, isn't it? Okay, move it down, please. Okay, where it says Crown's first proposal, yes. Yes, page 3. That's page 1. Okay, next, come down. Okay, further down, please. Okay, next page. Next one. Okay, thank you.
All right. Now, I think you're going to quarrel with my phrasing of the question of whether that was in favour of a reduction. So we accept that you made a submission to the Minister concerning a reduction in the ICB rate. in October 2014?
I do, and I think you read through that, it's quite factual. It's not me making a recommendation.
And do you recall meeting Mr. Felsteed in October 2014?
No, but I could have done.
Can I show you DLG.8002.0001.3408? See, the organiser is identified as you.
Yeah, look, I've got no doubt it would have been if there's having some sort of coffee catch up in the morning.
Missing the
Is that
subject.
the morning? 10 to 11, yeah.
That's just how it appears. The subject is the time.
Oh, I see. Okay. Now, did you also have lunch with Mr. Felsteed that day?
No, I've never had lunch with Mr. Felstead.
Could I ask you just to be shown DLG.8002.0001.3417? So an email from Mr. Felsteed to you on the same day. It appears to be it's upside down, but a luncheon dish. Do you have any idea why he was sending you a picture of a...
No, but I didn't have lunch with Mr. Felstead. I think, no, Mr. Felstead at times used to send me photos of some of the things he used to eat when he went particularly to China. Now, that could have been one of those events. So it was I think it's ahead of a something, isn't it?
It's the head of a chicken, yes.
Yeah, but I can assure you I've never had lunch with Mr. Felstead.
All right. Now, is that email, would you agree, suggests a degree of familiarity with Mr. Felsteed in your communications with him?
No, look, it's a one only. We might have, I don't know, what date was that given?
It's the same day, it's the 27th of
Yeah,
October 2014.
He could have mentioned the fact and he said, I'll send you a photo. This doesn't mean any friendship at all. I had no social contact or friendship with Mr. Felstead or Mr. Preston.
Now, were you aware that Crown made a submission to the Minister on the 37th of October 2014
Or what?
in relation to a reduction in the tax rate?
What date was it?
31 October 2014, it's DLG.0002.0003.0001.
Okay, that now, yes, that I wasn't wasn't necessarily me. We probably had some sort of record. Is that a Crown or DLG? It's a DLG document.
It's a
Yeah.
DLG document. I'm just asking if you can recall receiving a copy of that document in 2014.
I can't recall it. Obviously, we did because it's been addressed to the department.
All right.
And what they're doing there is they're formally writing to him to support the amendment, and I think this would have been after that document that you showed me. That was before that date, wasn't it? So he met with the Treasurer. The Crown had met. I wasn't part of that meeting. The Crown had met with the Treasurer, and I don't know what transpired between the Minister's office in relation to this, but at some stage they did seek a formal submission. And my recollection is that it went to Cabinet. It was not my decision, it's a Cabinet decision.
Mr. Sargent, you wrote to the Minister on the 23rd, or made a submission day the 23rd of October 2014 to the Minister, seeing the reduction in tax. You met with Mr. Felsteed on the 27th of October 2014.
Yes.
And a few days later Crown made a formal submission to the Minister in respect of the reduction in the tax rate.
Crown, gone.
At your meeting on the 27th of October 2014, did you have a discussion with Mr Felsteed concerning the reduction in the tax rate?
I can't recall if I did. I would doubt it very much because Mr Felstead knew that it wasn't my decision, and the tax situation had been going on for many years. But that date in October 14, I don't know what relationship the Minister had with Mr Felstead and that office. They work quite independently of me in that regard. But I know that from the point of view of the Minister, if they were going to get this particular agreement through, it had to go to Cabinet. And it wasn't something which I was being involved in. I would have surmised that the Minister would have liked to have had a more up-to-date submission if he were to accompany the Cabinet submission.
Your view as Director General of the department would have been an important consideration for the Minister of the day, would it not?
It would be.
So by way of example, if you had a view that maintaining the tax rate at the level at which it was could adversely impact on the financial capacity of Crown Perth, that is a matter that would inevitably be taken into account by the Minister.
It could be. Can I qualify that? When it came to the tax rate, I did not feel at all qualified to actually make a call on that. And that's why the Minister was very concerned that he had to get, the Crown had to get the Treasurer on board, because ultimately it was going to be a Treasury matter.
Were you concerned that if the tax rate remained at the level that was at the relevant time in 2014, it may have undermined the financial capacity of Crown Perth in the future?
I wouldn't say I was concerned if I repeated some of their arguments. I think in that memo that you let me read, quoted directly from what Crown said. But could I qualify that? No. I didn't know exactly what their forward estimates were like. It was a matter for ultimately for Treasury to decide in relation to the risks that they wanted to take if the rate remained there or the rate was to be reduced.
If you had been dead set against the idea, would you have conveyed that to the Minister?
I think that's a hypothetical.
It is a hypothetical.
Well, I don't know what the circumstances would have to be. I don't feel comfortable answering that.
So do I take it then you didn't convey to the Minister that you were dead set against it at the time?
No. You saw the tenor of that memo. It was very much factual, laying it out.
Did you provide information to Mr Felsteed about your view, your involvement in providing advice to the Minister?
Mr Felstead knew quite clearly that this was not my decision.
Was he interested to find out from you what information you had provided to the Minister?
No. If he had asked, we'd never have given it to him anyway.
Is it your evidence that, to the best of your recollection, the subject of the reduction in the tax rate was not brought up at your meeting with Mr Felsteed on the 27th of October 2014?
I would be happy to say that's the best of my recollection, yes, because it's not a matter that I was the decision maker, and Mr Felstead from the very outset knew that it was very much a Treasury matter.
All right. Mr Sargent, you and Mr Connolly, you know Mr Connolly, obviously.
Yes.
And he worked in the department under you for many years.
Yes.
And for the last 5 years of your tenure as Director General, he was the Deputy Director General of the department.
Correct.
and he was also the chief casino officer for a long time.
Yes.
Would it be fair to say that you had a close working relationship with him,
Working relationship, yes.
and that you knew him quite well?
From a working relationship, yes. I had no social contact with Mr. Connolly.
You knew, though, from your involvement with him in the work environment, that he and Mr. Hume maintained a friendship and relationship after Mr. Hume left the department.
No,
You did not know that.
I did not know that they maintained a social relationship after he left the department. I knew Mr. Hume and Mr. Connolly had worked together. And I did not know, and I said that in one of my, I think my previous appearance before the Commission, and I maintain that position.
You knew that Mr. Connolly was friends with Mr. Murray, though?
In 2015, yes, from then I knew, but it was in relation to basically around crayfishing.
And were you aware that Mr. Hume was a keen fisherman as well?
No, I was not.
Were you aware that Mr. Connolly and Mr. Preston maintained a friendly relationship?
No.
Were you aware that there were regular operational meetings involving Mr. Connolly, Mr. Murray, Mr. Hume and Mr. Preston?
I knew that the operational meetings, I wasn't aware of Mr. Murray because I wasn't aware of his level within the organisation with Crown. I always saw him as a sort of an aide to Mr. Preston. But yes, Mr. Connolly attended those meetings, not on his own. There are other staff that attended those meetings with him from the department.
Yes. You are speaking too quickly, Mr. Sergeant, yet again.
Sorry.
Now, coming back to Mr. Murray and your knowledge that he and Mr. Connolly went crayfishing.
Yes.
Were you aware of the regularity at which they went fishing each morning in the summer?
No, but I knew Mr. Connolly went quite regularly because he pulled crayfish. But I wasn't aware how often he and Mr. Murray went together. But I knew Mr. Connolly went quite often.
And when Mr. Connolly brought to your attention his desire to acquire a boat from Mr. Murray,
So was acquire?
a boat from Mr. Murray, I think you've given
No,
it.
I didn't think that. I thought it was another way. I think Mr. Connolly might have sold the boat to Mr. Murray. I think the circumstances.
My apologies. Whichever way around it was. There was a transaction involving the sale of a boat between
Yes.
Mr. Connolly and Mr. Murray,
Yes.
and Mr. Connolly brought that to your attention
After the event, yes.
after the event, as in after the sale or before the sale?
Well, the email just said that Mr. Murray had offered him, he's accepted it, and then he made some statements about this fair value, and I accepted that. There was no obligation from Mr. Connolly to Mr. Murray.
All right. Did you not consider that there's a transaction involving the chief casino officer and a person involved in operational meetings with that person was not a appropriate transaction?
I think I just said before, I didn't think Mr. Murray attended those meetings, those operational meetings, but obviously you're telling me he does. And I said at in my 9th of May appearance before the Commission, I didn't see Mr. Murray as a person of influence within the organisation. I think Mr. Murray joined the Crown, I could be wrong, around about 2012, something like that. I had quite a bit to do with Mr. Preston, as you appreciate, etc. But during my time, even through to when I was finished with Director General, I don't think I met Mr. Murray once.
All right.
So I didn't see him as a person of influence within the organisation.
So is your understanding of the position of Mr. Murray within the Crown organisation, was that taken from what Mr. Connolly told you, was it?
No, I think it was probably my own observation that I had not met the man. He'd been there since 2012. Mr. Conn was bringing this to my attention sometime in 2015. And as I said, I've had dealings with the Crown from that time through to when I retired. I never once met Mr. Moray. Well, to my best of my knowledge, I might have met him at something like the problem gambling sort of awareness week, those sort of things, but I can't recall meeting him in a formal capacity where matters to do with Crown was being discussed.
Did you make inquiries of Mr. Connolly at the time he brought the subject of the sale to your attention as to what Mr. Moray's position was?
I can't recall. Well, I can't recall the nature of the conversation.
And what of the relationship more generally? Did you consider that to be an appropriate relationship for the chief casino operator to have?
When you say more generally, what are you referring to there?
The regular early morning fishing for crayfish.
Again, I didn't think it was inappropriate. It was only during crayfishing season was a limited period, if I understand. And based on my understanding of Mr. Moray's position within the organisation, it didn't ring any bells with me. I wasn't overly concerned about it.
So is it the case that had you known of Mr. Moray's position within the Crown organisation, you may have taken a different view?
If I'd known it was more senior or more influential, yes, but I didn't have that view of him.
So had you known, I'll withdraw that. Now, Mr. Sargent, while you were the Director General of the department, you arranged for or allowed for a number of functions to be held at Crown Perth on behalf of the department, didn't you? There were
Can you give examples of what you mean?
Christmas lunches in 2010, 2011, 2012 and other times.
Well, they were lunches which I paid for.
At the venue of Crown Perth.
Because it was a nice venue, yes. But I paid for those out of my own personal account.
Would you agree that from the perception of the public that maintaining a degree of distance between the regulator and the party regulated is appropriate?
Well, in the sense it was Christmas functions. We were there that had functions. The staff, my colleagues enjoyed it. I didn't see it as an issue. We paid the going rate for the food, etc. Then you could argue that we shouldn't eat in a hotel then because we license hotels. We shouldn't go to a restaurant. I've taken to restaurants in previous years. It was my habit to take all my corporate executive to a Christmas lunch and I paid for it.
But of all the venues in Perth, you've chosen Crown on a number of occasions.
Yes, we did, but I've been there for 25 years. I went to a lot of functions, but the staff enjoyed it, particularly the smorgasbords. The smorgasbord was a very good one because it meant that people could have their choice. I saw no problem in that. It wasn't a regular thing. I went there as a genuine thank you for my staff.
Mr. Sargent, can I ask you some questions about a different topic? And it relates to the obligations of the Gaming and Wagering Commission under Section 7 of the Act. It's unnecessary, I think, Mr. Sargent, to ask you to be a lawyer on this occasion. I'm just going to ask you whether you accept some general propositions. Do you agree that a responsibility of the GWC is to formulate and implement policies for the scrutiny, control and regulation of gaming and wagering in Western Australia?
That's part of it, but then the latter parts to take into account, yes, that's part of it, yes.
Now, the interests of the community as a whole are included, and as are the need to minimise harm caused by gambling.
Yes.
And would you agree with the proposition that to formulate and implement policies, there is a need, at least to understand what the interests of the community as a whole are?
Well, it depends. You say understand. Would you say use the word understand? Did you use the word understand?
You need to formulate a view about what the interests of the community as a whole are.
Yes. Yes.
And would you agree the same applies if you're going to formulate and implement policies? You need to understand the harm caused by gambling.
Yes.
And to understand each of those concepts, interests of the community as a whole, or gaming harm, one way of undertaking that task is to perform some form of survey or statistical study. Would you agree with that proposition?
Yes, possible, yes.
And if you undertake a survey using statistical data, then one may be better informed about the extent to which harm is caused by gambling in Western Australia.
Yes.
To your knowledge, in the period, I'm talking now about the entire period during which you were the Director General and either Chairman or a member of the GWC, are you aware of any studies undertaken of the prevalence of gambling-related harm in Western Australia?
One that I can't recall how it was funded, but it was done in, say, mid-90s of West Australian harm. And then the other time was in 1999 as part of the national survey. It was done with the Productivity Commission. And the Productivity Commission updated that information for 2009 and basically said the same low level was incurred in 1999, which confirmed what had been found in the mid-90s. That was done. That's the only prevalent studies that I'm aware of within WA since I've been either DG or through to a ordinary member of the Gaming Commission.
All right. In the case of the 2006 update of the report by the Productivity Commission, there was no statistical analysis or surveys undertaken for the purpose of that report, was there?
No, that's correct.
So the only statistical analysis undertaken in respect of Western Australia, to your knowledge, or the most recent, was what was done for the purposes of the Productivity Commission's report in 1999.
That's right, correct.
Would you agree that since 1999 there have been a fairly large increase in the number of EGMs at the Crown Casino?
Yes, I would agree.
Sorry, I don't have a phone number for Crown Casino Perth.
Gary.
No.
Perhaps you'd like to turn that off, Mr. Sadler.
All right. So during the period from 1999 to today, what statistical information, if any, is at the disposal of the GWC to formulate and implement policies concerning harm caused by gambling?
I'll answer that, but can I qualify that I was happy with what the Productivity Commission had done to update to bring up to 2009. But the main source of information would have been the Australian Gambling Statistics, which were maintained by the Queensland, all the states and territories contribute a fee to Queensland to collate all the information. And over that time, from what I can recall, the real sort of per head of population expenditure on gambling, as distinct from the racehorse, had declined over those years, and declined quite steadily. Things like even the percentage of household disposable income relative to the earlier years had declined. So there were some statistics available which did indicate that things were getting worse.
Were getting worse.
We're not getting worse, and from the point of view of if it had gone the other way, if the trend line had been going up, so you had a trend line which showed that the expenditure per head of population for gaming in Western Australia was rising, or if the percentage of income household income spent on gaming was rising, then you'd have concern that that was actually a declining trend.
And this data from the body in Queensland, was that specific to Western Australia in any way?
No, every state, they played it for every state. And I recently saw something produced by the Australian Gambling Council, which gave a time series of over 10 years, I think it was. And it showed WA, from the point of view of gambling per head of population expenditure, was the lowest all the way through those years. The trend line was definitely down.
All right, so one indicia may be how much money people are spending on gambling. But what of those who develop some kind of problem gambling, an addiction or something of that nature? What data is available concerning?
The only data that also had available is from the Problem Gambling Support Services Committee, the funding of particularly the face-to-face counselling group in Western Australia. And the committee took this particular view. One of the main things we wanted to make sure was that they had a sufficient capacity to meet their demand. And I can't recall them coming back and indicating that there was a substantial increase in the demand on their services over that time frame. So that was just another source of information.
And as a consequence of your review of information available to you while you were Director General or a member of the GWC, have you come to have an understanding of the causes of gambling-related harm?
Well, when you say causes, things like what constitutes a person that experiences gambling. So somebody could afford to lose a certain percentage of their money, which may not be of harm. Others can't afford it. So it's a matter of getting a definition of what is problem gambling. And one of the fundamental issues is whether people are losing more or spending more than they can actually afford. But there are a number of definitions available. I can recall what's called SOBs. There's a Canadian index. These are social index indicators of defining what the harm is. There are some statistical.
My question is really directed to, we can define what the harm is, having defined what the harm is. Have you an understanding of what specifically causes that harm? So, for example, are there some forms of gambling that are more harmful than others?
I'm aware of studies which indicate that the game machines are more harmful than table games. That's an issue that, generally speaking, we're relying on the national standards to address in terms of any national initiatives to change or regulate the machine designs, those aspects of machine gaming.
Okay, so in terms of machine design, is one of the factors taking into account the speed of play?
Yes.
And what is your understanding of how that impacts on gambling-related harm?
Well, if the speed of a game is increased, obviously it means that people could lose their money quicker. So that means if you are a problem gambler, you might expend more. Others, it might mean they allocate a certain sum of money and it just may go quicker because the machines are designed on average to return a particular amount to the casino operator.
So the faster you can play, the faster you can lose?
That would be the principle.
And what about duration of in other words, time on the machine. So taking that, if you're on there for 24 hours, you can lose a lot more than if you're on there for an hour.
Correct. Whether you're on a table or a gaming machine, the longer you're there, because the odds of the game are designed for the ultimately for the operator to take a percentage.
All right. To the best of your knowledge, are there any regulatory requirements in Western Australia that deal with the duration of play, as in maxima in a day a person can spend on a gaming machine?
No, I'm not aware of any, no.
Are there such limitations anywhere else in Australia to your knowledge?
I'm not sure if they're mandatory. I understand in Melbourne there is a limit to the amount, because it was about 18 hours. They might have reduced it to 12, but I don't know whether it's mandatory, how mandatory that is. I can't recall.
Are you aware of whether at any time the GWC has given consideration to adopting or implementing a policy in Western Australia that deals with duration of play?
No.
Is it something that you would consider to be of a possible area for improvement?
Well, it's something which I hadn't turned our attention to look at, but it's one which one could look at, yes. Yes.
Is another area or a possible cause the accessibility that a patron has to funds available for gambling?
Oh, yes.
So, in other words, if you can readily withdraw funds from your bank account to continue gambling, that has the potential to cause more financial harm than if there is some impediment to continuing to withdraw funds.
Yes.
And that is the subject of a policy of the GWC, is it not?
There's a policy relating to the location of automatic teller machines, and there was also a policy regarding the use of FPOS machines on limits of the amount of money within the cage area. It can only be a debit card as well.
And what of other things such as loyalty programs? Have you any idea of the extent to which encouragement or participation in loyalty programs has the potential to increase gambling-related harm?
It can do, but there is also it's an element of the way in which returns can go not only to people with problem gambling, but people who can enjoy the activity of gambling. But yes, there's a possibility of that. Yes.
And to your knowledge, is there any policy in Western Australia in any way linked to loyalty programs?
A policy in relation to addressing problem gambling and loyalty programs?
Yes. So, for example,
No.
are you aware that in Victoria there are requirements in connection with loyalty programs to maintain certain data on the players?
Well, the loyalty program that was introduced here, and again, I'm going from memory, does require them to maintain data about their players, and they also have to provide that data on request from the players. That is my recollection, because the whole point of a data of a royalty is to maintain information on the players.
And the position in Victoria is different, is it not? They must provide the data to the player.
But they must. Ours, West Australian, we made it voluntary. Yes.
And do you understand why there was a difference in Western Australia, voluntary versus mandatory provision?
I can't recall. The only thing that I can suggest is part of the policy in Victoria may have been driven by the fact that they've got 27,500 machines outside of the casino. And there was from their point of view, there was quite a strong program undertaken in relation to matters to do with keeping people informed on the gambling.
Okay. Do you recall that towards the end of 2018, there was a presentation at a GWC meeting by Mr. Preston on Crown Perth's responsible service of gaming or gambling program.
Yes, I can, yep.
Could I? I just want to call up the document. It's GWC.0016.0016.0239, and there's a note. And the specific this is subject to a non-publication order. The specific page reference. So I think I've given you the wrong, sorry operator, I've given you the wrong reference. It is GWC.0002.0016.0260. And it begins at, for present purposes, at page _0013. We don't, fortunately for you, Mr. Sargent, need to go through this whole document. I just wanted to take you to a couple parts of it to draw some certain aspects of it to your attention.
Is this the sixth review report?
It is. So the following page is a letter from Mr. Preston to Mr. Ord in November 2018, setting out...
Is that before the meeting or after? It's before the meeting, isn't it? Yeah, okay.
This is part of the agenda paper. So the sequence of events appears to have been letter in response to some inquiries, agenda item, and then a meeting at which Mr. Preston presented, in part speaking to this and in part speaking to a PowerPoint. But the reason for drawing your attention to it is more to do with some aspects of the letter, Mr. Sargent. So they set out quite a number of aspects of their, at the time, Crown Perth's responsible service of gambling program. And then there's a heading on page _0029 at the bottom of the foot of the page saying other harm minimisation strategies. And if we can move over, yes, well done, move over to the next page. The two I want to draw to your attention as part of this suite of information provided to the GWC are, one, the limit on the ATM policy, which you made reference to earlier, and the second thing is the then standards, the West Australian appendix to the Australian standards on EGMs, which I think you also either mentioned or alluded to earlier.
Yes. And
the two aspects of that to which the GWC's attention were drawn in this letter are the limitation on the ability to withdraw funds, capped at $400, and the location of the ATMs.
Yes.
And the second is that the speed of play in Western Australia at the time was 5 seconds.
I think the minimum speed was 5. Is that right?
That's
I think
right.
It's the minimum speed.
So
Yeah.
just coming back to some questions I asked you earlier about the causes of harm related to gambling. These are two aspects of the framework in Western Australia that were intended to address those causes of harm.
Yes.
And at this time, at least, in the context of the RSG program for Crown, they were being promoted as aspects of their harm minimisation program.
Yes.
The next document I would like to draw to your attention is GWC.0002.0016.0266 at underscore 0218. Now, you may recall that in the early part of 2019, Crown Perth made a proposal to introduce cashless transactions for gaming purposes at the Perth Casino.
You mean the FPOS machines? That's what
Yes.
the FPOS machines at tables.
Yes. Do you recall that proposal?
Yes, I do. Yes.
And could I ask you to be shown GWC.0002.0016.0270, which are the minutes of the meeting. And item 6.7.
Okay. Yes.
Now, if you need to navigate, please, operator, to the following page where there's a resolution. Now, I just want to understand if you can assist the Commission, Mr. Sargent, around the meaning of a couple of things in this resolution. So, in the resolution, it's in principle approval, and I understand that that was subject to some further investigations being undertaken by Crown Perth that I think subsequently occurred. But in the Roman 1, there's a reference there to designated areas. What's your understanding of the designated areas referred to in that aspect of the resolution?
I understand that they were designated areas where there was supervision for the people to be using it, because the idea was to, if you're going to use an FPOS, that they're actually buying something. So it was a matter of how convenient it was to locate it, but they couldn't use, for instance, where you had to use a PIN number. So I had to use a PIN, but that's my understanding of it. But most was that gaming tables was the main thing.
All right. So was it your understanding that if, for example, a person is sitting on an electronic game machine, they would not be able to tap immediately using FPOS on that machine?
Definitely.
They would need to go to some other part of the casino and essentially utilise FPOS to purchase gaming chips or some other thing.
That's my understanding of it. This was in principle approval.
Right. Now, at this time, at least, was there any? Did you have any understanding of whether there was any limit on the amount that could be withdrawn each time the FPOS was used at the Perth Casino?
The limit was on the ATM, but the other limit was in the FPOS cage, but that was just subject to the normal bank limits.
Right.
The machines here, we were looking at about a $400 limit, similar to the outside. There's a $400 limit per transaction, and perhaps even a limit per day, which was less than what the banks that were offering.
So I know there was some delay in implementation of this proposal, or the system, ultimately, and it was reviewed again this year, wasn't it, by the GWC?
I can't recall if it was. I accept that.
Perhaps if I could ask you to consider this document, and I believe this one, there's a special non-publication in connection with this. It can only be shown to the witness and the Commission, not other interested parties other than the GWC. This document is GWC.0012.000.0 0603, and it's at underscore 0658. This, I believe, Mr. Sargent, was probably the last GWC meeting you attended.
Was it July, was it?
No, this was in June.
June, okay, yeah.
Have you got the document for Mr. Sargent?
Yeah, if there's a document, I can't read it. What do you want me to look at?
I can't see it, so
It's called 5.4 agenda item.
it is, and
So
there's,
it's register up left date, the 11th of June 21. That's the one.
sorry, you can't even read the particular document. You're not able to even state what is in the document. So I'll have to point you to parts, and you'll have to read them and then silently consider them. And not,
Okay.
if you're unclear, you'll have to try and ask for clarification in a way that doesn't reveal the contents of the document. So I'm just drawing your attention to the title.
Okay, sorry. I thought you wanted me to say what the title was. Fair enough.
And do you recall there being a proposal to make some amendments to one of the GWC's policies?
I can't specifically, but if you let me have a look at it, I probably might jog my memory.
All right. I think this is quite a long one, actually. It might be, perhaps this might be a convenient time. And if Mr. Sargent, I don't know if we can get a copy to him for lunch. So if you could... All right. We'll try and get you a copy, Mr. Sargent, so you can look at it. It is... What I'm interested in, if the operator could show Mr. Sargent, it starts at page 0.658. And ends at page 0663, which is, you'll see, is a policy document and some amendments to it.
So do you want me to read it over lunch?
Yes, if you don't mind.
I'll get some credits for it.
Absolutely.
I wish, Mr. Sargent. If I could, I would. Mr. Sargent, we will now adjourn for an hour for lunch, and we will resume again at 2 p.m. our time and 4 p.m. your time.
Correct.
Thank you. We will now adjourn.